last rough cut of the year. How did that happen so fast?
Oh my God.
I know. And so if you're interested in being part of the series next year, let me know. We'll start making the schedule up soon. And it's great to end the year having Renee as our last speaker. Renee Reijo Pera, our Vice President for Research and Economic Development. And she needs almost no introduction, so I'll turn it over to her.
Yeah, you can just call me Renee, like Cher, you know. Yeah, I just go by Renee. So today we're going to do an update on research. And just to prove, I decided that I was going to prove that I am still a researcher by talking a little bit about my research. But I'll try to limit that to only about 10 minutes. I'm going to then give you an update on our research plans, and if you have any questions on the research initiative, we can talk about that. There is also a meeting at 2 o'clock, an open house on the second floor of Montana Hall, and that is, we will talk about the research initiative more and what we're doing in research. So come join us for some snacks at 2 o'clock in Montana Hall, in the hallway on the second floor. It's important to come and join us because also Sandy Swart has done a remarkable job in trying to streamline the process of submitting a grant. So please give her some feedback if you have some suggestions. We're putting a lot of effort into making it easier to write a grant. And there's a reason for that, and that is because I have been writing grants, and one of the things I noticed when I came to MSU is, for me, it was very difficult to submit a grant. I had never encountered a place that was more difficult to submit a grant, and there were many times when I felt like saying, I'll just go for the next deadline. And so I really wanted to nip the next deadline in the bud, and so we have been working on that pretty hard. So come and join us. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with about 5 or 6 slides on science. I actually think that science has a lot to do with the ecosystem. And that's because my view of human development is that it's very fragile. I think our ecosystem is fragile, but that's not the only crossover. I think that our human development is also probably very susceptible to external signals that can actually make it go awry. So for example, it is a well-known fact that 70 to 80% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. That's in part because of some intrinsic factors, but there's also many external factors that are probably involved. And so I thought I would start with a movie. This is what I call it was a $40 million video. It's now become a $100 million video. It ended up being a video that had a very simple message behind it, but we saw that there may be more information in a movie than in still pictures of human development. And we developed this dark field technology, dark field microscopy in movies, and computer-generated algorithms to determine which embryo should be transferred. One of the biggest problems in IVF in animals and in humans. Okay, so let's watch the movie. Okay, so there's a few lessons in this movie. First, only 2 embryos hatched. So by day 6, they should hatch. And so out of that entire group, only 2 of the embryos hatched. The rest didn't hatch on time. And we developed some fundamentals of human embryo development by looking at these movies. We did tree analysis. We went back to the very beginning of the movie. And we asked the question, what factors predict success or failure of human development? And what we found was that there was a very precise timing. So if we watch a movie of development, from the stage of development when there's 1 cell and you can just see a waist where the second cell, where the 2 cells are going to divide, the time from seeing this waist to 2 cells in embryos that will successfully develop is 15 minutes, plus or minus 5 minutes. The time from 2 cells to 3 cells should be 11 plus or minus 4 hours, and the time between the appearance of the 3rd cell and the appearance of the 4th cell should be less than 1 hour. Previous to this, people had said, if you watch the movies, that human embryo development is very variable. Multiple embryos are transferred because it's very difficult to tell which one will actually succeed. And it was thought that human embryos could develop along a multitude of timelines. But it turns out that it's very rigidly controlled. We also identified a whole series of genes that are expressed over the time of human embryo development. And the reason that this movie became valuable is because we did something called automated tracking so that a computer can pick up the movements of the embryo and determine which ones are likely to be viable. And that ends up having an impact on pregnancy in clinics in that there's a 2 to 3-fold increase in the rate of pregnancy. So now why am I telling you this? Because when I came to MSU, we began to think about this data and some other data that we had generated that identified a whole class of new genes. There's 273 new genes, 2,000 new gene isoforms that are expressed in the human embryo and human embryonic stem cells. We called these new genes HPAPs for human pluripotency associated transcripts, and we selected 23 of those genes to look at their function and essentially disrupt them by CRISPR. Using CRISPR, something Blake Wiedenheft is one of the world's experts on. And we confirmed that these sequences appear to be very important. What's interesting about them is these aren't ordinary sequences. These are sequences that we've always thought of as junk DNA in our genome. So these genes, these new genes, encode non-coding RNAs that arose from viral transposition. So at the genome level, you can see that that simple DNA sequence is represented by black. And so most of these genes that we identified are more than half or almost entirely. So look at this gene right here. It's entirely composed of elements of retroviral transposition. What's interesting, though, is if we knock them down or knock them out, what we find is that cells in the early embryo change their fate. So instead of contributing to what's called the inner cell mass, there's this little part of the embryo that it will go on to form the child. So instead of the cells forming that population, they actually they are segregated into what's called the trophectoderm. And instead of being a part of the child, they're a part of the extraembryonic membranes that attach the embryo to the uterus. So these are human-specific sequences. They don't occur in other organisms, and they appear to have a very, very important function. We also looked at stem cell function. So here's where we turn to MSU research. So I applied for an NIH Pioneer Award. Okay? And I had a hypothesis. So my hypothesis is really probably too long to have ever gotten funded. And I haven't gotten funded yet. But it is a long hypothesis. This is my hypothesis. Okay. So in 1942, there was a man named C.H. Waddington. Okay. And Waddington came up with this concept called that eventually became known as Waddington Canal. When he came up with the concept, of course, it was not known as Waddington's Canal, but later it became very famous. Waddington came up with the concept that became Waddington's Canal in 1942 in the UK. He was a scientist. He got a Nature paper. He is the only author on that paper. There is no data, and all it is a hypothesis that the way development occurs is canalized. So the word canalized is in canalization. And what that means is that here is a cell right here, and that there are distinct steps to distinct states to human development. So imagine that some embryonic cells are developing. They have clean state identity. There aren't in-between states like heart-like liver cells or muscle-like neurons. Everything is cleanly determined. So in the response to the internal programs and the external programs, cell fate is determined along a certain number of lineages, and there's no in-betweens. Okay? So in other words, that this cell is in this lineage here, and there are banks of a canal that keep it in that lineage so that it doesn't flip over. So as we sit here, you can look at your skin cells, and I can pretty much guarantee you you're not going to get an eye cell right here, right? Because they're canalized. They're going down a certain pathway. And then since 1942, my field, many adjacent fields, have attempted to identify the underpinnings of Waddington's Canal. Okay, so what holds the banks up? And so here's where I applied for this NIH Pioneer Award with this hypothesis. So cell fate is established and maintained in humans via modulation of core evolutionarily conserved developmental programs by a set of novel retroviral-derived human-specific RNAs that act to enforce the canalization of human cell identity during differentiation and development. And I propose that it's the dysregulation of these novel RNAs that can lower the banks of Waddington's Canal and lead to cellular aging and demise. Okay? So the data that I had to support that hypothesis was pretty much what I showed you in the beginning, that human embryo development, we have 30,000 genes. Most of them are about 90 or 95% identical with mice, about 98% identical with many of the primates, and yet we clearly differ. We also differ in the diseases that we get, and so essentially the hypothesis is that our human-specific characteristics lie in our human-specific DNA. That might sound radical, or that might sound super simple. It might even sound really, really simple to those that that are in more the environmental sciences, because it seems to make sense, except that my entire field has never bought into that. So the idea has always been that our variation is in the polymorphisms that lie in the coding regions of our genomes, the differences. And yet, when we knock things out, what we see is we change human-specific timing and lineage. And it's human-specific DNA. Now, I really wanted to talk to you about this because I had written an NIH Pioneer Award 3 times at Stanford. Several thousand faculty submit the Pioneer Awards. They're $3.75 million for 5 years, and you can do what you want with the money. Okay, so they want you to pioneer. I applied for these 3 times at Stanford, and the process is that several thousand apply. They sort those into the top half, and they triage the bottom half. Then in the next round, the number of applications gets down to about 100. So we go from several thousand. First cut is about 500 to 1,000 or so. Next cut is about 100. The third cut is 25, and they interview you. And the fourth cut would be 8 people get these awards in the United States. And so I applied for these 3 times at Stanford, as I said, and I've never gotten interviewed. I've never gotten past the first cut, and I'm getting interviewed this time. I didn't get the award. I don't know if I'm going to get the award, but I'm being interviewed on Tuesday. And so what I think there's a few things that are working here, okay? So when I had applied at Stanford, every time I applied, there were like 40 to 60 other faculty members at Stanford who applied. And I probably am the only person in the state of Montana who applied this time. I don't know for sure, but I'm betting that might be the case. The second thing is I got older. So over the course of the 3 grants, I hope I got smarter. I definitely got older. I think I might have gotten smarter. That's self-assessment. We don't believe in that. And the third thing is that I had a story to tell, okay, about why it's important, why this problem is important. Bunches of people may or may not think this problem is important. It's an important problem in my field, okay? But I also think it's an important thing for us to have recognition for our research in the state of Montana. And so what I would love to see is for us to go for more of these things and to write amazing letters of support that actually get us the thing that we're trying to get. So one of the things that I see sometimes is that I don't believe we write the best letters of support. I was the chair of the nominating committee at my past institution, and so every year, any award that came up for anything, we had to write letters saying this person is the best person in the world, or this is not even that they're the best, this is why they deserve this thing. And I'd like to see us go for more types of these things. And I'd also ask you to keep your fingers crossed until Tuesday afternoon. Well, we'll see. Okay, now, so with that, I want to do a little bit of philosophy of research. Research has given me, I think, an amazing life when we think about the ability to be in an academic institution and do research. And I've often wondered, and when I took the job as the Vice President of Research, I finally looked it up. How did research get in our universities? Why is research here? Clearly, not everybody believes that research is essential for a university education. We have hundreds, thousands of institutions in the United States that educate but do not do research. That's much more common than doing research. So, just following World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote a letter to Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was the director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Prior to the end of World War II, research had existed in the universities, but primarily in agricultural research stations or centers. That was really the seed of research ending up in the beginning of the research being in the university. But following World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt wrote to Vannevar Bush And he asked them 4 questions. The first was, what can be done to make known to the world as soon as possible the contributions which have been made during our war effort to scientific knowledge? The second was, with reference to the war of science and disease, what can we do? The third is, what can the government do now and in the future to aid research activities by public and private organizations? And what's the proper role of public and private organizations in research? And then finally, can an effective program be proposed for discovering and developing scientific talent in American youth so that the continuing future of research in this country may be assured on a level comparable to what has been done during the war? It is interesting to read those questions because there's not a single question there that is not relevant today. So what did Vannevar Bush, Director of the Office of Science and Technology, say? He repeated the question, rephrased it. How do we increase the scientific capital? First, we must have plenty of men and women trained in science, for upon them depends the creation of new knowledge and its application to critical purposes. Second, be underscored. We must strengthen the centers of basic research, which are principally the colleges, university, and research institutes. These institutions provide the environment which is most conducive to the creation of new scientific knowledge and least under pressure for immediate tangible results. With some notable exceptions. There's always a notable exception. Most research in industry and government involves application of existing knowledge to practical problems. It is only in the colleges, universities, and a few research institutes that devote most of their research efforts to expanding the frontiers of knowledge, for knowledge's sake. Okay, so back in 1945, expenditures for scientific research by industry and government increased from $140 million in 1930 to $309 million in 1940. Expenditures for the colleges and universities increased from $20 million to $31 million, while those for the research institutes declined from 5.2 to 4.5. But the colleges, universities, and research institutes are to meet the rapidly increasing demands of industry and government for new scientific knowledge. Their basic research should be strengthened by use of public funds. Now, what was interesting about Vannevar Bush is that really these documents laid the foundation for the formation of the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the basic science research arms of the military and many of the other research institutes that we have. Okay, so with that background, we're in research, obviously, at MSU, and we're doing well. Not perfectly, but we're doing well. So, what has happened this year so far, although I woke up this morning and I thought it was the 1st of May, and here's what has happened to my life in the 15 months since I've joined you. Every 1st of every month, I get a report that is computer generated on the status of research at MSU. This report spits into my computer, and it's always there no matter how early I get up on the 1st. So that if I wake up at 3 in the morning, this report will be there tomorrow, and I'll know the status of research for up to this point. So that it's very difficult for me to go to sleep on the 30th or 31st because I want to know where we are. It's like, it is almost like Christmas, but Christmas with kind of a twist. It may not be good news. Yeah. So, in any case, here's where we are. Unbelievably, the faculty have increased the number of awards that we have been funded So funded awards are up 26% in number. I've actually never heard of that before, so that's a huge number. That isn't the number submitted, just to be clear. That's the number awarded awards. The number submitted is actually up by more than 40%. I'm shocked that out of an increase of 40%, we can get 26% funding. And in fact, we have a higher funding percentage than we did at Stanford University. Our funding percentage was about 15%. And I think that's because people wrote so many awards to cover their salary that a lot of them were unsuccessful. It was, you know, I think, is there still R and K selection kind of strategies? It's very similar to that. You have to survive, and so you put out a large number of things. And here we're doing pretty well in that we're getting a high percentage funded. Okay, our amount of funding coming in is up 17%. This has been up between 15 and 25% cumulatively every month. Right now we're at 17%. Those are new awards that have been funded that are coming in. Okay. Our research expenditures, which is what will get ultimately reported, are down by about 500,000. So what this suggests is that we have increased our number of awards. We've increased our amount of awarded funding coming in, but we haven't spent it yet. It's not a big problem, but if you hear, if the Bozeman Chronicle makes a headline that research expenditures are down, it's not necessarily bad news. It's that the expenditures will naturally lag the awards. However, I would encourage you to spend on good things, but spend. If you need a new refrigerator, let's do it now. So, especially if it's a really expensive one. Okay. So let's talk about where are we going. I've been spending, what's funny is, since I came here, I've been worried about recovery. And so in worrying about recovery, one can become, obviously, you know, kind of centered on these monthly reports and these little chunks of data. But I think we need to have a goal, and we need to think about what is truly feasible. And so I've laid out one goal. Do we think we can double our expenditures to 200 million by 2024? Okay. I thought about that a lot, and I don't see a reason why we can't. If we can put in more than 26% grants in 1 year, and I haven't heard a bunch of complaining, so I don't know if it was really hard to put those awards in, and increase our amount by 17% in 1 year when we all tried, but I think, you know, it wasn't that painful maybe. I think we could do that, and I think we should set a goal on doubling this. We have really outstanding research. I look at our research, and I look at our undergraduate students. A very large percentage of the research and students could be at any institution in the world. Now, in order to double our expenditures, I think we need to focus a bit. When I look at our list of grants, I am very, very, very grateful that of all the different types of funding. But at any institution that I've been at, there are windows of focus, of focused investment, of building in a certain area, and reaching sustainability in that area. The problem with investing broadly and widely is no one becomes sustainable. so that nobody has enough resources to reach sustainability and help their neighbor. And so I think we need to have a strategy to create sustainable organizations within our institution. Okay, so I put precision agriculture here. It's a word that I like. I like the word precision, but it's also got a breadth that I think that we can have a focus with an appropriate inclusion of a good sampling of our faculty across different disciplines. Natural resources, I have gotten feedback that energy shouldn't be in there. The state legislature put it in there, so I've just copied them a bit, but we can make that a whole separate thing. In physics and engineering, we seem to have some advantage in optics that I think we should make that area as sustainable and profitable as possible so that it can excel and return the value to the university. And then our major source of funding is health and biomedical sciences. And in that, immunology, this is immuno and micro. This area has been one of our real strengths. And then rural health. And I put especially mental health because I did an analysis of our health care grant data. And last year, we had 290 grants submitted in the mental health area. Okay. We need to make that happen. Clearly, that's showing a bottom-up that the faculty, the postdocs, the graduate student fellowship applications, people want to be in that space. And then across the areas here, we need to develop foundational strategic area, which is we need data modeling and computation that's outstanding across all of those disciplines. Okay. I wanted to make sure we didn't get complex about what makes success. So factors that determine success are the quality of the faculty and the students, the resources that are available, and the institutional reputation is one of those things that if you have reputation, you get more money, so yeah, it becomes something that's self-fulfilling. You actually have to work on the institutional reputation. So how might we accomplish our goals? So one can invest in all kinds of different things, and that is definitely what's been happening. This year, we will return $6.7 million predominantly to individuals across the campus as far as IDCs. We will run a deficit that's around $600,000. So if we had spent $1 million less, we would have a surplus. Okay. But if we had focused our resources and together as a collective body voted to essentially invest in the best, imagine what a group can do with $2 million for investing in a particular area of science and bringing it into the top 10 or top 25. And so we need to invest in the best, concentrate resources in strategic areas. Okay. Those strategic areas will move. So as we gain sustainability in one area, we can move over to investing in the next thing that we would like to do, either because it's an up-and-coming field and we think that we should be there because we have the faculty expertise, or because it's the fourth thing on the list instead of the numbers 1 to 3. And then I am committed to supporting scholarship and creativity. So one of the things that happened prior to me joining the university is scholarship and creativity grants, which run about $150,000 a year, were removed from my office. And I don't like that at all. So out of the $6.7 million that we give back, we can give $150,000 a year to scholarship and creativity right off the top. Okay. So what are the challenges? Here's where the challenges are. Our largest category of support, i.e. where do we spend our money? We spend it on faculty recruitment and retention. We spend resources, we allocate them without focus on strategic areas. And we allocate resources not paying attention to our expected return on investment, i.e. if we give a person some resources, will they write a grant and get a grant back? So we can't be giving resources with no return that a grant comes in or something comes in, because then we just deplete the pool. So for example, let me tell you about some of the challenges that I've seen. We get asked to invest I've been asked to invest $600,000 to support a hire where the CV doesn't suggest that there's necessarily a chance of great success. Our second case here, case study, these are real things that happen. $75,000 is requested for graduate student support with an input from the graduate dean, and there's no history of graduate education or research for more than 7 years. Most institutions I've been at, you can't do that actually, because a graduate student probably needs to be in a place that has had graduate students. And then investment 3 was a faculty recruitment where we use substantial funding, and it's not anywhere near any one of these areas here. Okay, it's none of the above. And this really has begun to bother me because we are wealthy in general in research, extraordinarily wealthy. We have $6.7 million out in the community this year, new money out there. And we didn't necessarily, and nobody even knows that it's there. So it should have been used at least enough, in a way enough that it was clear what we were doing with that money. Okay, so what are the potential solutions? I don't really know that any of these are necessarily the one solution. What I do know is non-optimal use of funds is what's costing us in terms of opportunity. We need to invest in things where we know we're going to get a grant back. $200,000 is a good investment in people that tend to bring in $500,000 grants. That makes sense. And then we need to use our resources. So we have a limited number of F-score, COBRE, EMBRE, CTRs that are allowed to us, and we need to put pressure on these, and this group has done fabulously, but to make sure that these are in the areas that we want to, as a university, move into. I've been talking about doing, and your institution is a good example of interdisciplinary searches. So some of the problems that we run into where we have investment, I don't want to sound like I'm preaching, but we have problems with hiring that if we generally tend to do really great at the assistant professor level, but when but when we try to do associate or full professor, and it's a departmental search. So this is different from here. The Institute on Ecosystems is the poster child for doing it right. I think interdisciplinary searches attract interdisciplinary people. And that there might be problems when we have searches for senior faculty that are just within our departments. It might seem confining. I think I would have had a hard time being recruited here if there hadn't been some other things that I was doing, because I was at a stage in my career where just moving from being a professor in stem cell biology at Stanford to cell biology and biochemistry here would have just seemed too much like a, just a change in scenery, but not necessarily a change in job. So I think we need to, as a community, come together and decide where do we think that, what people do we think we need that could contribute to us across the different priority areas. I don't know why I get all kinds of ones. And all of them should just be one. We need to restructure this VPRED allocation system. I'll just warn you that as of July, we're going to start revamping. Okay, I'm not fond of an allocation system that doesn't involve department chairs and deans. Okay, we actually have to be in this in the use of resources together. So we can set up groups, for example, to determine what faculty we want. We can talk about, is this where we want to spend our resources? I don't think those conversations have happened. In essence, money goes out of my office by individual request, which is highly variable depending on what news I've gotten so far that day or whatever, the weather. I mean, it doesn't have any rhyme or reason. There's not a process that actually is at work. It's too stochastic. And then, finally, we have this great opportunity. The Montana Research Initiative was funded. I can't believe it. People said a year ago, no chance that will ever come through. And being a scientist, having written grant after grant after grant after grant, you still believe that something good will happen when people say no chance. That's what writing grants actually gets you. You're constantly just trying. You may or may not get it. You submit a paper to a journal, they may or may not accept it, but you just keep on doing that stuff anyway, because it's a way of life. And so with that, I just want to say, what have we done this year? So I don't know that we need to go through all this. We did a lot of visiting this year. We did some things that we've restructured, and do come over to the second floor of Montana Hall and visit with us. Funding opportunities, publications. We are working on proposal services. I want it to be so easy for you to submit a grant that you hardly know that it happened. Yeah, I know, that would be good, the submission part, not all the work where it's all the ideas and stuff. We can't do anything for you there. We've done some seed funding stuff, restructuring the office. I'm hoping that we're becoming that we are viewed in the community as good people, nice people, people that you can interact with. We launched our first initiative, which are those ones on the thing that slide was previously. We've developed some external relationships that I think are actually going to be important. And people are moving to Bozeman. A couple companies have moved here, venture capital firms, some things that I think we can use as leverage for the Montana Research Initiative that we've done stuff. Okay. So, do we think we can reach 200 million? Well, if so, we're going to have to prioritize. We're going to have to begin to distribute funds via a defined, effective, and inclusive policy. And something that I didn't really talk about, we got to start using our space better. We spend $4 to $5 million in leases. And if there is lab space that is not completely full, I just think that we have to ask ourselves, do we want to spend $4 or $5 million on research, or do we want to spend it on leases? Some of our buildings are not particularly full, some of our leased space. And yet, when I discussed the option of saving a couple $1 million for distribution for projects, I'm told that this campus is completely full. And we have a whole building that has only 4 or 5 labs in it. That's $1.4 million. So I think we need to make some of those hard decisions. I think I have a take-home message. So here's the take-home messages. Okay, so number 1, I want the word "our" to be really, really clear. Okay, the research enterprise is our shared enterprise, and that means space, IDC returns, faculty recruitment and research is something that we need to use very, very wisely. I sometimes hear excuses. I sometimes give excuses for why we didn't do what was optimal. Okay. I think we need to up the game on the optimal use of our resources, because this is our shared enterprise. We're healthy. We should be rich, but we kind of overspent. And we have the opportunity. I came here because I believed in this third thing. And after a year and 3 months, I believe in this more strongly than I ever did before. That's what's been, this has really been an enlightening thing to see. I don't believe that I have had, well, there was one day. I've rarely had a day when I wanted to return to Silicon Valley. There was one day. I won't tell you what happened. Long story. But I just have not, it's been a fantastic journey. And the reason is we have the opportunity to create one of the world's most sustainable, a word I have learned from you all, and outstanding research enterprises to be envied nationally that is responsive to the needs of Montana and beyond. Almost every single, I was at Cornell, where have I been? The University of Wisconsin. I got a degree there. I got a degree, master's degree at Kansas State University. I got a PhD at Cornell. I did my postdoctoral work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and then spent 20 years in the Bay Area at the University of California in San Francisco or at Stanford. We have the most sustainable organization of all of those places. Okay. There's a few reasons why. This is not a poor state. So the state has just invested in research. It's $15 million, which is interesting because the state of California just put $100 million into, I think it was the brain, okay, neural health, mental health. What's interesting about that is there's 38.5 million people in the state of California and $100 million. So that's $2.50 a piece. $15 million in the state of Montana is $15 a piece, right? So there's a more per capita going into research in the state of Montana from the state than in the state of California. So I think that's a really good beacon. We also have a wonderful place to live. I mean, I hate to say it. I moved here only a year ago, and I already feel like shutting the doors so that nobody else goes in. Shut the doors behind the last Californian. You know, it's a place where people want to go. But I think there's some things, and then the third thing I'll just say is that the quality of the faculty that are here is really, really, really high. I don't mean that gratuitously. I just didn't know what to expect. And so that has been a surprise. The things that keep us down, I've heard them said that this part of administration isn't working, that this isn't working, that isn't working. But hiring, if we look at our things that determine our success, we have control over these. Faculty, researchers, and the research office have control over these, okay? You may not think you have control over the faculty, but talk to your chairs, talk to your deans. Which faculty we actually hire in the long run, you have control over. Resources, we have control over that, for sure. And then institutional reputation, I think that, you know, we have control over. It's something that we have to work on. We need more people to apply for things. We need to fix some web pages. You know, Kenning knows how needs exceed the faculty, for sure. Thank you.
Renee, this is great.